So I think it's safe to say that living in Detroit has officially become mainstream. Now, this always hasn't been the case. There's been a lot of critics and a lot of haters that were doubting Detroit, thinking, well, Detroit's going to be nothing but a corrupt pile of rubble. And fast forward to today in 2024, I can assure you that is far from the truth. And if you ask people who live in Detroit, they would say the complete opposite. It is absolutely thriving, and there's more people moving to Detroit every single day. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at downtown Detroit and see why so many people are moving there, what there is to do, from the job market to the cost of living to the food scene and much more. So make sure you stick around to the end because we're getting into all that right now. Hey, if we're meeting here for the first time, my name is Eric Meldrum. I'm a realtor with True Living Group here in Metro Detroit and Ann Arbor. And in today's video, we are going to be taking a look at what life is like living downtown Detroit. So if you do like this video, give it a like, share it with somebody who's considering moving to Michigan or Detroit. And if you are wanting updates on all things Michigan and you just want to know what life is like here, or you're considering moving here, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel for updates on everything you need to know about moving to Michigan. And now let's go take a look at what life is like living downtown Detroit and see if it's the right city for you. All right, so we're going to get into what makes living in Detroit so popular right now. But before we get started, I just want to let you know, living in Detroit is not for everybody, and that's okay. There's plenty of other places to live in Metro Detroit depending on your lifestyle, but Detroit has been growing in popularity, and that's because of a few reasons. The city has gone through a rebirth, and there's a lot more amenities than there has been. Right? More restaurants, more places to live, more grocery stores. That stuff wasn't there before. So people that lived in Detroit, early on, or the downtown area early on, without those type of things, they had to travel outwards, and that just didn't work for everybody. But as a lot more investment and a lot of things have changed downtown Detroit, a lot more people are taking notice as the infrastructure is growing. So in today's video, we're going to explore what that looks like. All right, so I think a really good place to start when we talk about living in downtown Detroit is with the job market. And I'll be honest with you, if it wasn't for the thriving job market that we have here and have had here over the years, I don't think the city would be as far along as it is today. It took a lot of risk for a lot of the employers to go into Detroit and say, okay, we are going to recruit talent to the Detroit area, and we don't know where they're going to live. We don't know if they're going to like it here, but we know Detroit has seen better days, and we are dedicated to bringing it back to its glory days. It's an amazing city, right? There's tons of history in Detroit. We knew it was possible, but the employers, those are the folks that made it happen, right? Big companies recruiting talent to the area, and that's really what makes an economy. If people want to come to Detroit and live there, well, they need a place to work, right? And living downtown and working downtown is a lifestyle within itself. So that's what made it happen. And really the big industries that are making up a lot of the jobs here are folks like Ford, GM, Stellantis, right? That's the automotive industry. Deep roots in Detroit, for the automotive industry. But there's one in particular company and one individual who I can't make it through this whole entire video without mentioning his name, which is Dan Gilbert. And Dan Gilbert, if you don't know who that is, he's the owner of Rocket Mortgage, formerly Quicken Loans. He owns the Cleveland Cavaliers. He is just one of the people who really spearheaded a lot of the initiatives in Detroit, right? He has a lot of investments. He has a lot of upside, to Detroit seeing better days. But let's be honest, that capital investment into Detroit early on, that was a huge risk. Again, not knowing if that was going to pay off. Well, his company, Rocket Mortgage, has made it a point to be headquartered here in Detroit. They have multiple locations. They employ over 14,000 people here in the Metro Detroit area. Some of those people living downtown Detroit and absolutely loving it. And many other companies have as well. Just to name a few, Stellantis employs 10,000 people in the Detroit area. The city of Detroit employs over 8,000 people. And there's hospital systems as well. The Henry Ford Hospital System employing close to 9,000 people. You got the Detroit Medical Center, which employs close to 8,000 people. And many other companies have taken up headquarters in Detroit as well. So in addition to the automotive industry and Rocket Mortgage, which is a mortgage company, there's also other big industries like healthcare and a couple hospital systems in the Detroit area, the Henry Ford Hospital, the Detroit Medical Center, and then Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is an insurance carrier in the medical space, employ a lot of people downtown Detroit, close to 15 to 16,000 people, between those three companies alone. So when it comes to job opportunities, you got the medical field, you got automotive, and then there's also a large push into tech. And Detroit's kind of been known for this like mini Silicon Valley, and it has deep roots stemming from the automotive industry, getting into, autonomous vehicles and the electrification of vehicles. A lot of companies and tier 1, tier 2 suppliers are centered around the automotive industry, and they want to be close to where a lot of the research hubs are. And Ford had a large investment in the Michigan train station, which is just opened, which is absolutely beautiful. And right next to it, they're building an innovation hub, which is going to be one of the first electric charging streets on Woodward. Okay, so a lot of research, a lot of development are going on around there. And then in addition, there's a ton of startups in Detroit, right? That really became a popular thing, when the WeWork space opened up and other co-working spaces opened up, and more startup companies, started to see, well, Detroit is this kind of melting pot for, automotive, technology, healthcare, and that spins out a ton of innovation within itself. So software companies started spinning out, and we've just seen a large influx of companies from New York, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, Texas. They're all now either opening up businesses here or moving their businesses here or recruiting talent here in the Metro Detroit area. So for this reason, the job market is really where this all starts, because again, without high paying jobs so we can live the lifestyles that we want to live, none of this is possible. And this also might be where your journey is starting, thinking about moving to Detroit. You might have a job offer from one of these companies, or maybe you've been looking at the job boards, saying, wow, there's a lot of opportunity in the Metro Detroit area. So it's because of this reason why these opportunities exist, and these employers took the risk, which are now recruiting folks like you who are thinking about moving to Detroit. And let me tell you, there is some upside to doing so. So when we get into the cost of living, you're going to understand that living in Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or any of these places, that have a very high cost of living, well, you could be making just about the same, if not a little bit more, in your net by the cost of living in Detroit. And when it comes to the cost of living, I just want to let you know the days of buying a $5,000 or $25,000, city block, those days are gone. Those do not exist anymore. That was the wild, wild west. There have been more regulation, more stricter guidelines around who can buy, at what time frame. Do you need to start rehabbing the property if you do buy it? But in terms of the cost of living here in Detroit, it is still very affordable. So if you are looking to live downtown, it does range quite a bit. So you might be asking yourself, well, what can I expect to pay if I'm living downtown Detroit? And that's a very open-ended question. There's so many different opportunities in the downtown area. You got condos, you got single family homes, you got townhomes, you got new developments, you got older rehab developments, and it really just depends on what you're looking for, right? If you like history and you're attracted to some of these older style homes or older style complexes where they've kind of rehabbed them and turned them into loft apartments or loft condos, or there's a lot of history in some of the older like 1920s or 1930s buildings, and they've brought those back to their glory days. Those do exist. Some of those are going to be high end, or some of those can be like kind of right around $500,000-$600,000 for condos. So you could find condos ranging anywhere from $300,000 on up to $3 million, right? If you're looking at some of the penthouses in some of these buildings. And it's just a wide range. And that's why I'm not going to give you any averages in terms of like condos or single family homes, because they vary from location to location, whether you're looking in like Midtown, Corktown, Brush Park. You could even head over to Indian Village or East English Village. All of those areas are going to have different price points depending on what you're looking for. And that's why I said, if you're interested in a lot of the history of Detroit, some of the older style homes or older buildings, you can definitely seek those out. But if you're looking for something new, there's a ton of new construction happening right now. I mean, there's cranes in the air. There's so much building going on downtown Detroit. It's hard to keep up with them all. So if you do have questions about anything real estate related in the Detroit area, definitely give me a call. I'd be happy to help. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was the walkability of downtown Detroit. So if you're going to be living downtown Detroit, looking at the walkability factor is one very important thing that you should be considering on wherever you're thinking about moving to. And if you want to be close to your office, you want to be close to your work, picking a place that's going to be, kind of in that vicinity and walkable is really important, because a lot of the newer areas like Corktown, Brush Park, Midtown, all of those areas might not necessarily be where your office is. And that's a really important thing, if you're not going to have a car, if you're coming from a place like New York or Chicago, or San Francisco, where, public transportation, whether it's a rail system, or whatnot, like that's readily available and it's really easy to get around. But here in Detroit, we don't have public transportation. Yes, we have the bus system, but that is super unreliable. And it's always notoriously late. And a lot of people that I've talked to just don't want to ride it, so there's other options like Uber, Lyft, but that can get expensive over time too. So either you start looking at investing in a vehicle and buy a car, or you start planning ahead and looking at the areas where your office is and trying to plan out like, okay, can I walk to these places? Like, is the grocery store nearby? Is the gym I'm going to go to, is that nearby? So those are really important things to kind of look at when planning your move or planning where you're going to live downtown Detroit as well. But overall, the city is very walkable. When you're downtown, you got the river walk. So people bike, jog, all through the river walk. And then downtown, they've just redone a lot of the sidewalks. We had the NFL draft here recently, so that brought a lot more accelerated investment into the infrastructure and making the city look a lot better. So a lot of the sidewalks were done, and that was a really big thing that, people in Detroit absolutely loved, because like, man, the sidewalks were getting a little bit tired. So that's a big improvement, to the city as well. But when it comes to walking just from like district to district, that's where things can get a little bit far-fetched. Maybe you're looking at a house in Indian Village, right, which is a really kind of upscale, more historic, that's kind of like the McMansions of downtown Detroit. That place is awesome. Like, go check that out. But Indian Village, if you wanted to walk to a Red Wings game, for example, it'll take you an hour and a half to go from Indian Village to Little Caesars Arena. So it's not necessarily a hop, skip, and a jump. It's still in Detroit, but Detroit's a huge city. So just keep that in mind for the walkability factor in Detroit. All right, so the next thing you need to know about living in Detroit is you definitely need to come hungry. If you like food, this is the place for you, because there are so many restaurants that are opening up on a daily basis. And originally, for this portion of the video, I had a bunch of notes right in front of me, and I was like, I'm going to go over some of the trendy places, like go eat at the Apparatus Room or Grey Ghost or Green Dot Stables. And I just did, but I don't think that's doing it justice. Like when I first started hearing about all the trendy places in Detroit and trying them for the first time, that was like 5-6 years ago. And there's been more new places coming out every single year than the year before, it seems like. And some of the new places like Mad Nice, these places just open up and they keep getting better and better at the experience. And the experience is what really draws people in, right? It's one thing to have good food, but the experience of like making the craft cocktails and putting on a show behind the bar, or, bringing out a plate of food that is like absolutely gorgeous to look at. Like, that's the experience. It's Instagram worthy, right? And there's been dedicated channels to restaurants in Detroit of creators who just cover all things food in Detroit. Right? Go look them up. The Detroiter, the Detroit Foodies, like all of those accounts exist, and they don't have a shortage of content, and for a good reason, because the amount of restaurants that are coming out on a daily basis, or I should say weekly basis, because I don't think they're coming out every single day, but weekly and monthly basis, just still blows me away. So definitely bring your appetite. If you're moving to Detroit, bring your curiosity, be willing to try new places, be willing to try old places. Like that rundown bar, is probably a really cool place. They probably have some awesome dish, like Green Dot Stables, for example, a little bit on the outskirts of downtown, but you would drive past it and be like, yeah, we're not going there. They have the best sliders, right? So if you want to go just kind of chill, have a slider, have a cold beer, that's the place to do it. And then there's upscale places like the apparatus room where you can go hang out, or if you want to go over to Selden Standard. That's the name of it, Selden Standard. Absolutely great food. So like I said, if you're coming to Detroit, bring your appetite and don't forget to try some Detroit style pizza. And that's the other thing Detroit has is lions and tigers. Well, we just don't have any bears. No, I'm not talking about the Wizard of Oz crap. I'm talking about the sports fans right here in Detroit. Now, if you go around and ask anybody from any other major sports teams who has the best fans, of course, you're going to get some controversial answers, but I can assure you that Detroit will always come up in the conversation. We got some of the, I wouldn't say rowdiest fans. We like to call it diehard. When you have the Lions who lose so much and you stick with them and you stick with them year in and year out, that's diehard. That is a diehard fan in my book. And Detroiters are the epitome of those diehard fans here. So having all four sports teams, here in Detroit, that's one big pro. I mean, you got the Lions downtown, you got the Tigers downtown, you got the Red Wings, you got the Pistons. And well, the Pistons always haven't been here, but they now play at LCA. When that new arena was built, they left Auburn Hills and came downtown, which completed the four major sports teams in the downtown area. Not a lot of major cities around the U.S. can say they have all four sports teams playing downtown. So that's something Detroit has going for you. So in addition to all those sporting events happening pretty much year round, if they're not playing, right, those venues are turned into concert arenas. And you got some big headlines that come here. And if you've ever been to a concert at Ford Field or LCA, they're both absolutely great. Like I haven't been to LCA for a concert yet, but I've heard the acoustics in there are much better than Ford Field. But I haven't heard a terrible thing about anybody complaining that the concert sucked at either of them. So I don't think you can go wrong. So this next topic really comes out of a common question that I've heard from talking to people who are moving to Detroit, coming from some other large cities. And they always ask, hey, is there places where I can get out into nature? Or do I have to travel for that? And it's a valid question. If you're somebody who's lived in, I don't know, say New York or Chicago for a period of time, like you are just surrounded by big buildings. Yeah, sure, there's the occasional park, here and there, but it's really kind of like a small area. Right. And I remember when we went to Chicago and we were visiting, we were actually looking for a park, for our kids to just go play. And yes, we found one, right? There was a playscape and there was a track around one of them. But some of them were just really small. And that was really it. So there wasn't a lot of place to kind of run around or, do certain things that, will kind of get the heart rate pumping. And that's a big question that I've heard. So here in Detroit, and yes, there are places to go where you could actually enjoy the riverfront. There's people who run up and down the riverfront every single day for exercise. You got the river view. You got green spaces where they've basically taken some of the dilapidated lots or dilapidated buildings, and instead of waiting for investors or developers to come through and rehab those and build something, they just said, you know what, there's enough space and enough land in Detroit for developers. We're rezoning this and redesignating these areas into green spaces, and they've made them parks. Right? They planted trees, they planted tons of shrubs, they've done, art stuff, within the parks, and really designated those areas of places where you can go relax, clear your mind, either exercise, get outside, and just feel like you're part of nature. So the answer is yes, like those places do exist, and the city is still investing, more and more into redeveloping some existing parks and opening new ones for you to enjoy. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about is the community here in Detroit. Now, at the end of the day, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, the people that live around you, right? This is either what makes it a good community to live in or just an okay community. And it's hard to compare Detroit to other cities. And I know I have been, like Chicago, New York, but I've been to both of those. I've even been to Los Angeles, and I don't get the sense of community in any of those places like I do in Detroit. Detroiters are some of the most welcoming people. They've been through tough times. They know the hard times that the city has gone through, and they're absolutely welcoming to a lot of newcomers. We have this thing here in just the Midwest. It's like the Midwest charm. And I think that's really rooted in the heart of Detroit, even more so, in Detroit because of the tough times that we've been through, knowing that Detroit does need help and the city wasn't going to get rebuilt or be where it is today without people really coming together. And that's a really big testament to the people who've lived there for a long time, the people who have invested, the people who have chosen to call Detroit home, especially the downtown areas and the newer developments. I remember when I was actually shooting a video in Brush Park, I actually got the cops called on me in Brush Park because I was rolling around with, my camera gear and just doing selfie vlogs. And the cops rolled up and said, hey, some local people had called the cops and said there's some guy taking videos and photos. They're just concerned, right? Like, that's great, right? The community's self-policing itself. And I wasn't offended by that. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, there's a bunch of $1 million condos around. There's a bunch of, people here, like they want to make sure the area that they're living in is safe. So I thought that was great. But, when it comes to the community in Detroit, the spirit of Detroit is really alive with a lot of people. And, you got to look at the type of folks that have been here for a long time, that are moving here now. We have a lot of artists. We got a lot of people who are working tech jobs. We got a lot of young professionals. We got a lot of older people. Like I just had a couple reach out to me from Australia that was considering moving to the Detroit area because they love the story, right? And they get to be part of this. And I think that's really something that you might be thinking about right now, which is, how does my story contribute and relate to what Detroit is going through, right? And how can I bring my expertise or skill or creativity to Detroit and make it my own? It's kind of this land of opportunity right now for people who are starting businesses. Entrepreneurs are flocking here. Businesses just in general, right, that are looking for good talent are flocking here because of these things, because of the community, because of the investments that are going on in Detroit. So I'd be remiss to really make this entire video and not talk about the community, not talk about where this started. And I know a lot of people will watch this video and say like, wow, this guy's doesn't live in Detroit. He's never been Detroit. Yeah, I grew up on the east side of Detroit. I grew up in St. Clair Shores, but I spent a lot of time in Detroit as a kid. My grandpa owned a business in Detroit. We used to go down there and hang out during the day, and my mom would take us down there and we would talk to all the workers. He owned a catering business. Those catering trucks went from their office and served a lot of the plants, right? A lot of the automotive industry down there. So we got to talk and see what it was like, doing business in Detroit. And, I just look back on that. I'm like, that was one of the most fun times of my life, like really being in the hustle and bustle before Detroit really took a downturn. And it makes me emotional because my mom is not with us anymore. She died when I was 10, but I apologize. I didn't mean to get emotional in this video, but I just look back at like, if my mom could see where the city's at today, knowing like what her dad's business went through, it ended up closing, the struggles that they went through in Detroit, looking at the city today, like she would just be blown away. All right, so there you have it. Hopefully this video gave you a glimpse and some insights into what living in Detroit is actually like on a day-to-day basis, some things to consider or some questions to ask yourself. And if you are ready to be part of something special here in Detroit, I can assure you, Detroit is ready to welcome you. So feel free to reach out or drop a comment below. And if you are somebody local here living in Michigan or living in Detroit and you have something to add to somebody considering moving to Detroit, drop that comment below as well. We'd love to hear from you. So if you're ready to get started on your move or you just have more questions, I want you to book a Zoom call with me. All my contact information is down below in the description, but the best way for us to connect is via Zoom. I can walk through the city using Google Maps, answer any questions you have, and that's typically the best way we can kind of sort out what's the best lifestyle for you. But feel free to call, text, or email. Any way works, and I look forward to speaking with you. So until next time, go check out these other videos about all things Michigan, Metro Detroit, Ann Arbor. We cover it all, and we'll see you on the next one.